welcome to the show. My guest this week is Aaron MacDermott. Aaron.
Hello, Callum.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.
How you been, man?
Pretty good. Nice to be here. It's my first time ever being podcasted. So
This is only my fourth podcast to date, so we're both pretty...
I'm intrigued to see what the future holds for this conversation. So
Great.
Yeah.
Sure, the people listening are as well.
Well, I think I haven't listened to many podcasts, so we'll see.
No. Any that I might have heard of?
I've listened. I listened to a lot of the Ricky Gervais show when that first came out.
Oh, the XFM ones.
Yeah,
and stuff.
Yeah.
It's great.
But then the thing about podcasts is that when they first came out, there wasn't like a program listing, so you couldn't. You did if you navigated it yourself, you end up wasting a lot of time because you'd be listening to things. It had a lot to do with what the guy sounds like as well.
Mm.
The people sounds like. So I was listening to a few American ones that were just so hyper and intense that I couldn't listen to what they were talking about. I also listened to one that was like a podcast version of how it's made. You know, that TV program.
Yeah.
But again, that was just too hyper and didn't really enjoy it.
I think that when podcasts first started coming out, they're so obscure, such an obscure medium of just like, what the hell's a podcast? And
yeah, and there's not really a proper explanation that I've come across as to. I remember typing in like top 10 podcasts or something, and it didn't really get anywhere.
You'll get different answers every time. That's the thing, because they are just. It's essentially. There's a podcast for everyone, every kind of viewer as well.
It's interesting that you're making these. It is interesting you're making it because I would never think to do it.
Yeah.
And I think they're a good thing to do. Yeah.
I mean, it's also about, like you said, sometimes it's about the talent attached, the name attached.
Yeah.
So
which one of us is the Carl Pilkington?
Which one's the talent? I think we make up a talent.
Yes. Collectively, we may be slightly mildly entertaining.
Yeah, hopefully. Any of you do just stumble across this podcast drunkenly on Facebook one night or YouTube, have fun.
That's the great thing as well, isn't it, actually, when you think about anything like that goes out into the public, the people that stumble across it, like that'd be great. Imagine like 10 years time, somebody just stumbles across this thinking it's some profound conversation. Well, it could be a profound conversation.
Yeah, or it's found after like a nuclear apocalypse. They just find a recording of this. Like, was this the world? Was it just people sitting in rooms talking about stuff?
Yeah, and then I was just this is the first time that I've.
I think I'd accidentally just summed up human nature there, but just sitting in rooms and talking about stuff until we die.
I was saying that to Rob the other day, actually, a friend of mine. I said, pubs are, because I went to a pub the other day, and there was more people in there drinking tea and soft drinks than there were drinking beer, and it's a kind of a gap in what people are looking for. You know, shops are all that there are on the high street now, coffee shops or clothes shops or whatever it is you want to buy. But pubs are like filling in a gap of people who want to be with other people. They don't want to be at home.
Yeah.
But they don't necessarily want to be drinking.
Well, they're all. You said they were drinking tea and coffee. That's a stimulant. You know, it's caffeine. That's a kind of drug. It's not quite, but everyone in there is kind of on some kind of social lubricant.
Yeah. Social lubricant.
Yeah. You know, we all
actually,
kind of.
Is that not what this is? Is that
maybe.
not what this is? The podcast is the next drug.
It is rife at the moment.
Yeah. So maybe it actually is. Maybe it's fulfilling the exact same lack within humans.
Well, I think that because you go from we've gone from radio to TV and all of this stuff, and now people seem to be, I don't know if reeling it in a bit is the right phrase. I think there was something around gathering around and listening to the radio or just listening to people talking. And I think actually at the moment the spoken word is one of the most popular things, podcasts and that kind of thing. It's coming back in a massive way.
Well, because if you think before, like I remember when I was at university, and when I went there to start with, I was studying animation, and I remember thinking like a personal project for the first time, realising how much was involved to actually make a simple story for a minute long. It was weeks and weeks and weeks of drawing, like a 24 frame per second drawings, or 12 frame per second, double time, and that was just to create something really simple. It was like a man walking along. He went into some environment and there was some stuff, and you had to make a soundtrack and all that sort of thing. And then obviously people made like graphic novels who didn't quite want to do that. It was like the whole comic book thing, and then there's obviously just people who write books, and then the adaptation of that into film. Then there became the viewer, and the viewer had a different relationship to TV and film, because it was so abundant that they didn't have the energy to be giving it their full attention. So they became more passive in the way they listened to it or watched it. They'd be on their phone, having conversations whilst the film was on. And I suppose the podcast is like the ultimate non-investment. Just lay back and absorb whatever it is. Maybe we've all got like a ADHD. Maybe it's like a collective antidote to a deficit of attention.
Well, it is just kind of this thing of it feels very much within that same vein of on demand. Now people want interesting conversations on demand. They want, thought-provoking, conversations about philosophy or politics and that kind of thing. It's almost like, I think it's a really encouraging thing, because it means we're craving that kind of intellectual stimulation when, no one wants to listen to a podcast when nothing happens.
So imagine this technology was actually injected at a different point in history. Like, forget about the technological advancements that it requires, but let's just say there was some loophole in the creative evolution.
Or aliens gave it to us.
Just gave us one thing, which was like a dictaphone or something, and an ability to broadcast it. So imagine like podcasts existed in the 1700s or something. So you had the uneducated, and that was the way they couldn't read. So all of a sudden they were able to have conversations about things way beyond what they could think about.
Yeah.
That would have been a really interesting... This is quite a deviation, I admit this.
I know, we haven't even gotten into talking about art yet, but...
Right, we'll add some structure then.
Add some structure to it. But I like where it's going, This is the point of doing these kind of things. This is what makes it different to radio and that kind of... Like I said, I've been doing interviews at the moment with political candidates, and they're not like this. These are...
But is this not how conversations should be in general?
Yes, definitely. It feels so reciprocal.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah. And also, like, when you meet people and you have small talk, it would actually, in some ways, be better if there was a... I think that's why people love things like Brexit, because it gives people something to talk about that gets rid of small talk, and they can just instantly go into this conversation about something.
God, we're so sick of it now, though. I
want
another thing to talk about. We're
sick of it now, but I still hear people going on about it.
Oh no, because it's still just as important, and it hasn't actually happened yet.
Well, let's not get on to
it. No, absolutely not. God. Oh my God, yeah. That's all I've been talking about for the past couple of weeks or so, especially in these interviews.
Yeah.
So let's get back to art. That's what I brought you on here for.
Right, here we go.
I want to hear, an insider's perspective of the art world and things like that. You're a sculptor yourself.
Yes, yeah.
Tell us a bit more about your process, how do you work?
So, I suppose in order to... the simple answer is clay. So you have like subtractive and additive sculpture. So subtractive sculpture would be carving in wood or marble, where you take stuff away from a solid block, and then adding sculpture is essentially where you build up from nothing. So I prefer the additional style of sculpting, because it's a bit more like drawing. We're drawing, or if you were to draw in white on black paper, you could link that to subtractive sculpture, I suppose. And if you were to draw using graphite or charcoal on white paper, then you're building up. So I suppose because I was used to that first, That's what my brain kind of works that way. So simple answer is clay over a sort of simple armature, figurative. But in terms of, well, that is the what, but the how. That's the how, but the why. The why is more interesting, I would say.
Okay.
So the why would be that, well, let's go right back to early years then, I suppose. So I'd say I was a relatively normal child. My parents were both Irish. There was quite a strong sort of Roman Catholic background. Went to a school that had a church on site and prayers before meals and all that sort of carry on. But I never really adhered to it too much within myself. And I remember my parents travelled off to India when I was quite young. I might have mentioned this to you before. And what actually happened is they met a guy in Brentwood, which was where we lived at the time, who was going around to people's houses telling them about a meditation class that he'd started, or a group of meditators. So I think it was my mum that went along first, and she got involved in this meditation, and eventually she asked my dad if he'd like to come. He was working up in London at the time in banking and finance and that, so I think it was quite good for him to have something like that, de-stressing that. But to fast forward a little bit, essentially they got into that. There was this group of people from England who were going to a specific place in Rajasthan in India. So my parents went off to India. I was quite young. I think my aunt or my uncle looked after me and my brother. We carried on going to school for a bit, and they went off there to go and do that. When they came back, they were so taken by it that they opened up a meditation centre next to our house. In the sort of conservatory, they converted it into a meditation centre. And before long, we had like 10 or so people coming every morning at 4 a.m. to do this meditation. So inevitably, I started observing this and seeing the difference between the world that I was living in. Going to school, everybody's got quite similar situations. Like parents do this job, that job, or people meet up for dinner parties, or they go to the pub, or go and watch football at the weekend, all the sort of normal stuff. But this other thing that had been kind of introduced to me was kind of polar opposite to that. So it created something in me that needed to understand, to bring those two things together. And I think that's why I ended up being an artist. And I think the thing that actually began that process was when I remember something about in meditation texts that they were studying was the concept of infinity. I remember my mum saying to me that every single person, every adult that I met for about a year, I would always say to them, what is infinity? I was stuck on this concept, what is infinity? What is infinity? And I think at that point, I needed a way of working out an insolvable problem. And that's when I turned to art and drawing.
So art for you is kind of like, every work's like a different combination of trying to work out this bigger thing.
I think when a person is posed with a seemingly unsolvable problem, it can't be solved using the normal language system. So, for example, if I was scientifically minded or mathematically minded, I would have adopted the language of maths, of numbers. That's a language to comprehend something that goes beyond language. Musicians do the same thing, artists do the same thing, poets do the same thing. Obviously, poets still using language, but so it became a way of trying to understand the opposites of the two sides of life that I'd experienced. And very quickly it became about the human body, because I remember having what I would describe as an out-of-body experience when I was about 14 or so, I don't know if it was an out-of-body experience. That's how I would describe it. I'm not really. I'm not fully unsure that is what it was.
Well, tell me about that. Tell me about what happened.
So, I was. I suppose I was sitting there thinking that I was going to be doing some homework, and I was quite stressed about something. I was in my room, and I had this weird feeling that something was wrong, like a strange sensation that something was wrong. And I couldn't quite understand what it was, but I felt exhausted all of a sudden. So I lay down on my bed, and within minutes I felt like really heavy. I could feel like the whole of the weight of my body in the bed. And I thought, like, this felt amazing. Like, I felt like I was just, everything had gone. All of the weight of my body had gone. So I opened my eyes and I was looking around the room, and I kind of remember having the thought of like the room looked smaller, or more accurately, I was bigger. I was occupying more of the room than I had ever seen before. So the room looked tiny. And then that kind of continued and continued until I felt massive. Like, the inside of my head felt huge, enormous, like a football stadium or some vast structure or area. And then I suppose I must have started dreaming, I imagine, because I started seeing these rings, these strange circular rings. And at first I thought it was a pound coin. So I was kind of between being awake and dreaming. And I saw this pound coin rolling from the right-hand side and a pound coin rolling from the left-hand side. And the 2 pound coins met. And then when they met, they became rings, like Olympic rings.
Oh, right. I was expecting a 2 pound coin.
Yeah, no, that that would have been great. Yeah, that would have been great. Yeah, so no.
But fever dreams don't tend to follow logic. So.
Yeah.
Or whatever this was.
Definitely. I think the pound coins was the point at which my brain hadn't quite gone into a dream yet. And so I think it was rings or circles that I was seeing, but my brain was trying to process how this was still a physical object that I could relate to. But once the two collided, it was almost like I fully entered into the abstract realm then. And you know Newton's cradle?
Yes.
Which
Yes.
swings from left to right.
Mm.
Essentially, I was on a giant version of that, but that swung from left, swung in the opposite plane. So they all, rather than hitting each other, they stayed the same distance from each other. But how do you explain that without being visual? Because this is
this is a podcast.
Yeah. Okay. So so if we use like So imagine. Okay, here we go. Imagine that you're looking at Newton's cradle.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it so that you're looking at the narrowest point of it, so that all you could see is one ball. So one ball obscures the other.
Oh yeah.
6 balls.
Okay.
So you're at that
Gotcha.
angle. And then I get rid of the fact that they're balls and make them rings on strings.
Okay.
And now make each one sway left, right, but alternating, so that say 3 go left and a few go right, and they're all kind of crisscrossing each other. So I was kind of looking at that, and I'd jump onto one of the rings, and then 2 would go from left to right, swaying from left to right, like the weights in a clock. And then I would jump through again. And each time I jumped through, I seemed to be becoming heavier and more distant. And this all kind of sounded quite fun and interesting and a bit bizarre, and I wasn't really thinking too much about it. But then out of nowhere, I was presented with the idea of, you're going to die. And I remember saying, no, I'm not ready.
Wait, so you're going to die now? Or,
Yeah, like
or
that's
you're just
it.
going to die inevitably?
No, like now.
Oh,
Like you're about to die.
That's scary.
Yeah, it was like, you keep going, you're about to die.
Wow, so it goes from sort of fun...
There was these weird rings.
Oh god, it sounds like it goes from like Sonic the Hedgehog,
Yeah, collecting rings
to just some bombshell. By the way, you're gonna die.
It was a very
What?
sudden. It was a very sudden thing. I think what it could have been is like imagine that you're like in a hot air balloon and you're just enjoying looking at the ground, and then eventually you look up and you're like, wow, I'm actually in space. It was more like that. It was like, oh, I've gone a lot further than I thought I'd gone.
Or maybe your brain just sort of catches up, where it's just like it's enjoying everything, but there's that part, and it's just like this isn't normal. And so the instinctual reaction is you're gonna die because this hasn't happened before. So
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you are right. Yeah. I think that is, but the logical mind kicked back in then and thought, well.
But I think it panics when it comes back in.
Yeah.
Like even if you have a hot air balloon, for instance, you can think, oh, so beautiful, you're going up, but then some part of your mind just goes, if this turns off right now, if this, if suddenly it just, you will die, you will plummet.
Well, actually, you've kind of reminded me of something there. That actually is what you're describing there. The bit that panics is the bit that is embodied. So this was a disembodied experience, as in there was no part of me that felt under threat when it was just the visual.
So was it like your conscience was going to die? Consciousness was going to die?
It felt like I was at the outer limits of something.
Yeah.
So anyway, once I said no, like, and I put as much of my effort into saying no to whatever it was, I felt like I was in space at that point, just shouting no. I woke up. But, and this is the only time I've ever experienced this, I've never experienced it since, I had sleep paralysis. So I'd woke up, but I couldn't move. And it took me what seemed like half an hour, let's say, but I don't know how long it actually was, to gradually move fingers and twitch my mouth and move my toes. And then I eventually could move.
To be trapped inside your own body sounds terrifying.
Yeah. So that experience is what made me
get into art. Do you think some part of you then, because you said like a lot of your work looks at anatomy and the human body, and I've seen some of your sculptures of, you love just doing people. Or, body parts, limbs, arms, legs, and is some part of this about you, subconsciously or otherwise, trying to regain that control that you lost?
I think so.
That physical control you lost, and now you've kind of you're learning all you can, but also manipulating and making your own stuff. Is some part of that like trying to regain that control?
I think that situation freaked me out. Basically, I think it kind of made me think like, wow, is that actually what happens when you die? And it made me completely rethink a lot of things. And it wasn't until, I would say, another 10 years later, after let's say 10 years of art and studying anatomy and sculpture and things like that, that I did actually look back at this and think, oh wow, I was kicked out of my body in that experience, and I was searching for a way back in. That's what I was studying. I was studying anatomy, and I used to believe that the skull was like a sacred shape that allowed for human consciousness to exist, and the chest was a sacred shape that allowed for certain experiences to exist. So it was almost like the voids of the human body were like caves or cathedrals or churches.
This isn't far off some like spiritual beliefs I've heard. But also, if you go back far enough as well, you heard of trepining. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is prehistoric medicine.
Trepining.
Where stuff like
drill into the head.
Yes. Yeah. So let's say you've got a terrible headache or something. Like back then, it could have been a brain tumor. Not like they'd ever know.
Releasing pressure, they thought.
So, but they also thought some part of that was there's something maleficent in there, like a spirit or a demon, and then by drilling the hole is a way of releasing the demon. Obviously a lot of people died, some people didn't, because the way we know that is because we've dug up skeletons where part of that bone has grown back just around the edges of where they've cut.
So you can see it's a certain amount of lifetime to have healed, so they must have stayed alive, you mean?
Yeah, for at least another decade or so. But all that kind of feeling of, it's in the head, or it always comes back to the body. Of like so we used to think that the heart was in the head or something like that. And
well, I know various things that I come across that were surprising in the time. Like, for example, you have brain cells in your spine, and that's why when you touch, say, a very hot pan or something like that, it doesn't actually require the signal to go to the brain and back. It goes to the spine and back. That's how you move your hand so fast.
Mm.
So there are a few weird things like that. But I think going back to what you were saying, your question posed about trying to regain control. I think that the general human experience is that when you are conscious, looking out through your eyes, the space that you inhabit takes up a lot of your attention, and it's so shiny and glossy and interesting, particularly now with all these screens and entertainment, that you don't actually necessarily pay attention to your body that much. And I think that being outside of the body is almost like a possession. It's like you're vacant from your body, and then I know that for example, they used to believe in stuff like this in the Middle Ages, I suppose, that like a vacant body could be inhabited.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a person engaged in certain moral codes of conduct, they would leave themselves vulnerable to possession. But those sort of terms, it is interesting because we've gone through a whole period of development, as mankind has gone through a whole period of development where they've rejected those terms and seen them as childish fantasies. But I do think we will return back to those superstitions again with a new consideration.
I mean, we are in some ways, aren't we?
Some ways,
because things like astrology is still a big thing. Like, even at uni, like, one of my housemates was really into astrology and like star signs.
Yeah.
They were literally one of those people that would say, "Oh, that's such a Capricorn thing to do." It's
well,
like, I mean, to me, it's Matt. They also believe that aliens built the pyramids, and if I hope you're listening, you know who you are. Like, I still haven't let that go.
I remember being...
That was a whole night of argument. But yeah.
I remember being 18 or something like that, and I reached that sort of, I suppose everyone goes through it when they start asking themselves certain questions about conspiracies, when you first hear about all these conspiracies. And
it's never just one conspiracy. You go
everything.
down a rabbit hole
Yeah.
of like, oh, bit of this, oh my god,
I think the best one I heard was about the pyramids are actually only the top of a diamond, and the inverted part is under the sand.
Under the sand.
And that is a spaceship. And I remember thinking, like, are these people really...
It's crazy. It's
great
like,
imagination.
All you got to do is look at this. The Sphinx in Egypt? Like, it's not properly built. They have to do massive restoration work on it every decade because it's built on, like, a bad patch of land. It's built in certain ways with I don't know. I don't know exact details, but... like, something about it needs major restoration, like, every 10 years. You'll think, like, well, it looks like it was done by people then. Just shoddy contractors of the time.
Well, I suppose, like...
aliens.
There's some great conspiracies there, man. I mean, there are some great conspiracies. The wasn't it occupied recently, actually? Didn't, like, some not crowdfunding. What's the thing where you... you organise a crowd to descend upon a certain place.
Oh, like flash mob.
Flash mobbing. Didn't they like flash mob Area 51 or something and try and
No, that was the raid. Now that was a Facebook event that got. So it was called Storm Area 51. They can't stop all of us.
I see.
It started some joke Facebook event, and then like millions of people clicked interested or going. Right. Even I did. Like, because the memes coming out of it were just amazing.
Oh, and then the government issued a
Well, this is
warning.
the thing, because enough people
Yeah.
were so the government actually had to start taking it seriously.
Yeah.
And then there was all this other kind of wacky stuff, like you saw army personnel being briefed on what like a Naruto run was, because that's how they said they were going to get inside the Area 51,
Oh,
like
see.
Naruto run in. So they actually had to explain to like military personnel what a Naruto run was.
So they could prepare for it. I actually heard that they arrested one woman who was or a man who was taking a piss in a bush.
Like,
So,
I think that's about it.
And then I think another person who was sort of drunk and disorderly or something.
Like 100 or so people turned up.
Well, there was actually a festival
there.
over
They
the
just
hill.
stood there.
Yeah. There was
Like,
a festival
what do we
over
do
the hill,
now?
wasn't there?
I don't think anyone expected to get that far. So they were just standing there.
I mean, there is a great thing which I've mentioned to you before about how the film Predator and how I love the film Predator. I mean, I love it, and how like two of the actors became head of state in America. Jesse Venturis. And have you seen Jesse Venturis' conspiracy program?
No.
Him and his son. That's great.
I think I'm gonna have to search that later.
Yeah.
You've piqued my interest. I'm gonna be up all night now. You're gonna see me tomorrow. I'm just gonna be knackered, going up half the night.
Well, it's great. He sends his son to the thing, and they're at the gate of Area 51, and the son's just like, "It's all right, Dad. I'm going in, and he just jumps over, and you don't know what happens. So anyway, back to.
Well, there's the thing is like, my experience of getting into art. I mean, I went a kind of different route. I used to do stop motion, clay animation. Back in school, we had a club for it, and that was really great. I used to love things like art and. Just used to grow up on that stuff. Grew up on that stuff. So, but for me, it was like film in particular. I think the first film that I ever had a real reaction to was Jaws, and I was like 10 years old, and watching it, I was like, this is terrifying. And when a film can have that kind of effect on you, after that, I was obsessed with sharks. It's kind of in the same way you're obsessed with the body after your experience. Like I had to find out
an encounter with
I'd never experienced sort of being gripped like that by a film. It was the first film I actually, wanted to rewatch. And
so tell me more about that then. What you just said. So when you said you become obsessed with sharks, in what sense?
Oh, I would look up. This is back when the internet was quite limited, but even then, I was going on any kind of site I could, looking at sharks.
So rather than porn, you were like waiting for the screen to unfold with these like.
Come on, show us those fins.
Like, oh, there he goes. There's the dorsal fin again. But yeah, okay. So this is interesting then.
But after that, that's kind of how I got into films and stuff. I don't know. It all started with Jaws. I mean, first of all, I was like obsessed with sharks, and then just, I don't know. After that, it kind of became a film thing. Where maybe it was some part of me was like, if only I could replicate that reaction that it stirred in me, that I could make someone else go into film.
So that's really interesting what you just said there, because it is possible that my experience was caused from seeing a piece of art in a manuscript thing.
Mm.
So that I don't know if I. Oh, okay. No one's gonna seek me out and find it. There was this thing called the 7 lessons. Each lesson had an image, and it was a painting. And these were kind of almost in the style. The closest thing I can think of in Western culture is William Blake's work. There's something similar to that. And it was one painting that was kind of like the concept of infinity, cycles of time, and the idea of rebirth and things like this. It was that painting that stuck with me. And it's similar to what you're talking about here. So you're saying that this thing you saw, and maybe this is what passion is. Maybe passion is an experience that is the first time. Maybe it's like the first thing it's almost like a first love. Like it's the first thing that speaks to you.
Yeah.
You as you, in a way that makes you think, I can't currently understand this or grasp this, but I want to. so I'm going to try. And I think that there's like there's versions of that in our society which are really mainstream, like footballer or pop star or ballerina, and things like that. Like really, and in their own way, yeah, they can possibly be the same. But I think what creative people, I use that a bit loosely, maybe what they are touched by is a bit more specific. And I love the fact that it was Jaws, like. Because that,
I mean, even from the outset, you got that music that, like,
I mean, that is, yeah,
immediately provokes something in you. But I think it works both ways as well, because, like, there are those, I think, that get into it to understand something about the world. Maybe in the same way you did. The way I kind of look at it now, from my point of view, is it's art for me. From my side of things, it's more, I do more writing, filming, some sketching. It doesn't ever feel like an obligation. Mm-hmm. Things like sketching and animation, I've decided not to go, well, not for now anyway, not to pursue as a career. So there's less pressure on me, and I just enjoy it. I just do it when I want. And it's just something for me that I enjoy doing. But then I feel like a lot of my work is about trying to make people understand. So there are those that get into it to understand the world. And it's more like mine is like, I want people to understand my world. And again, it's this reciprocal thing. It kind of feels like a chain. Art is a kind of chain of... Well, in our case, it seems that, someone else's work has provoked us into going into that. And then, I don't know, we had the same ambition. If you could just inspire one person or make one person understand you through your work in a way that you weren't able to.
It's almost like we're talking about a psychic entity relay race, where it's like this loop, the athletics loop around a stadium.
Yeah.
And you get past this baton, and it triggers in you this need to pass that baton on.
Pass the torch.
Pass the torch, the eternal flame.
Yeah.
Round in the cycle of time, round the track, and the only way to do it is to become fitter and stronger, physically or mentally. Like, I think the thing that the thing that surprised me the most recently, I suppose, borderline realization, is the idea that which you have in yourself, when you just said a moment ago that you wanted to share something so that people would understand you.
Yeah.
Do you think it might be possible that the thing that you want people to understand isn't actually you? It's the thing that struck you at a certain point in your life, and so you inhabited. Like, it's this personalization of this abstract thing that we all attach our identity to it and feel that we need to show the world this thing. And I think there's a certain amount of struggle that goes on until it gets to the point where you're like, this isn't actually me. Like, it's as much about me learning about it as it is making other people learn about it. And the gap between people understanding you is the fact that you've got this in you. That's what separates you from other people. It's not...
You've just had the catalyst.
Yeah,
that sets it up. Everyone's on that kind of same.
Yeah. This is an interesting concept, actually, because the.
Does that kind of mean that everyone has that? Everyone has that innate potential in them.
I think so.
To be.
I think it's just whether they've been struck by the lightning.
Depends how we do our art, though. Plenty of. I've met bricklayers that put as much effort and passion into their work as artists I've met.
Yeah.
So who's to say that's not a form of art as well?
Well, art used to be about mastery. So art used to be, like you have the term, if you take art more loosely, like martial arts, for example, the mastery of that art, then the mastery of an art would kind of make more sense than with what you said about a person who was mastering a certain action. And I think once you master a certain action, there's two things that can happen. One is that it becomes so monotonous that you just completely disassociate and you don't even pay attention. And then there's the opposite that can happen, where you become so good at it that it doesn't take any mental effort, and so you can just watch yourself do it, and it becomes almost like watching a film. You know, you're watching yourself do something, and it's quite mesmerising.
Well, it does often
hypnotic.
feel like that. Like you know this as well as me. You get into like a sketch or something, and then before you know it, hours have passed, and the whole time you've just been hooked into this little. It's like its own little bubble of existence,
and
you're just totally hooked on it.
Do you find that tends to the entry into that point tends to be a monotonous thing? So, for example, if you're in the point of creation that's very open-ended, you don't necessarily settle into that. But if you go into a monotonous area, so say for example you're doing a painting and you have to start doing leaves on a tree, then you might enter into it. Or if you were writing, maybe if you were doing something slightly monotonous, the writing equivalent of laying bricks.
Yeah.
I think that monotonous mantra-like thing can lure you into that.
So it becomes more like a lull and a kind of just a process you get lost in, like breathing. Like you don't have to think about it. It's just this. It's just going on. Can you describe any memorable responses that you've had to your work?
Okay, I remember I done something quite bizarre actually. Looking back on it now, I suppose everyone has one of these sort of weird versions. When I first came to Colchester, I didn't really know anything here or anything that was going on here, and I remember a place called I think it was like West Cornwall Pasty Shop or something.
Yes,
near Debenhams, the old Debenhams.
Or Pasty Company or something.
Something on those lines. And I used to go in there, and there was a woman called Anna who was Spanish, I think, and she was quite interested in art and things like that. Because I used to I used to sit in there sometimes and just be sketching something whilst I was having something to eat. And at the time, I had a studio in town that was quite near there, so I kind of came there regularly just to get out and stretch your legs, have something to drink, have something to eat. And eventually she said to me that they had an upstairs that they weren't using very much, and if I wanted to put on an exhibition or something, then it would be fine. So
that's handy, isn't it?
I didn't really.
You just want to put on an exhibition.
Yeah, I didn't really think much of it for a while. I was like, well, it's a pasty shop. Like, what sort of exhibition?
That's brilliant, actually. God, what a combination! Why has no one thought of that? We combine the art and the pasties. Come for the pasties, stay for or the other way around.
So it's a hilarious story because basically what happened is eventually I took her up on the offer, but it meant that because it was like a chain company, that was all over the country, you couldn't interfere with their set, essentially the theatre of their shop. So I had to construct a fake wall out of wood, and then hang my paintings and drawings off of those. So I remember I made these flyers and I made these leaflets and I handed them out, and I learnt a lot actually. I learnt a lot of what not to do, put it that way. So I was upstairs in this.
It doesn't sound like you can go much wrong in a pasty shop,
Well, this is the thing. I was upstairs.
If all else fails, there's pasties to.
Well, there was unlimited pasties that day, yeah. But I remember being up there. I'd set up this exhibition. It must have taken me a lot of work. That thing of like where you've got something, you become a bit sort of sidelined, and the night before, everything seems really stressful, and you're really trying to do this, all these things last minute. And then the day came. I went there early. Went there in the car. I had all this wood sticking out of the car, and I unassembled it at home, and then reassembled it there. And hung all the paintings. And we're just waiting there. I think I was there for about 3 hours by myself. Nobody came in. And then one person came in. And they bought a piece. They came in and they were talking about things. And the piece they wanted was something I'd put in as an afterthought, which was actually a piece describing just some personal experience that I'd had. And this guy latched into this one and he loved it. And he said to me, how much is that? And it was at a point where I was just like, no idea. What do I say? I was like, I don't know. Yeah. It took me a while. It means something. It's it's relatively impressive. And he started saying to me, well, did you just arrange the figures on this page like that, or did you pre-plan it and things like that? So I was like, no. This all happened in about half an hour. I drew this whole drawing like in a sudden sort of frenzy, and I took him up close to it and showed him like where you could see bits had been rubbed out, where I changed the pose of a certain figure, and it was he wanted the piece, and I said to him 600. just randomly clap.
600
out of nowhere. It's just
Did you have your little finger in your
I was like,
corner of your mouth?
$600 million. But no, he was. I just said 600. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what I was thinking. And he said, "Oh no, I guess it's obviously very important to you. I can't buy that." He said, "But what I would do is I'll take this other one, which was just a drawing of the town hall."
All right.
So that was actually probably one of the first pieces that I ever sold.
For 600?
No. I think I sold that for 160 or something like that. And I said to him that I'd frame it and all this sort of stuff, and in the end, that ended up costing me about 80 quid. So it was just a complete waste of time, the whole thing. But it was fine.
What frame costs 80 quid?
Well, because it turns
out. How big
that
was this picture?
It was. I'd say it was like 28 by inches
Still
by
decent
16,
frame.
something like that.
20 quid?
I remember trying to frame it with some sort of cheaper frames that I found, and it just didn't look right. So I had to go and get it framed properly, and I thought, it's weird actually when you're selling a piece of art, because it doesn't become a monetary thing, with me anyway. Like, I had to make the framing right for it to be.
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
You know what I mean?
I respect it as well, because it's like, to me as well, like I've never even thought about selling an art piece, because just I don't know, once you bring the kind of money aspect into it, I don't know, some part of it ironically devalues it.
And with film, that's actually quite interesting as well, because like, you've got a thing over there on your wall, which we were saying, is it a drawing or a print?
Yeah. And
I suppose in film, there is no. Well, maybe there'd be a master copy, I suppose, would be the closest to, the actual thing.
Mm.
But everything else, you're not actually selling the creation.
Yeah, it's a
replicant. It's a replicant of it, and I suppose there is a bit of. I mean, to be fair, actually, there was a period of time where I was but I suppose where I put the most effort into that side of being an artist. The artist that actually sells work and does work. I abandoned all that. I just completely became about self-education, and I was sort of like, well, this for me is not going to be about making loads of money.
Yeah.
At the moment, anyway.
I mean, same with this podcast series. Like people can look on the description on any of the videos. You'll see this is not for profit. This is an experiment of just seeing. I'm interested in lots of different things. One of them's podcasts. One of them's journalism. I just want to see what I can do. It's not really about. I don't know. I don't really have a plan. It's kind of just, hey, I like listening to podcasts. I reckon I could do one, and I'm just literally trying it out. You're seeing no money gets made from this. It's essentially just, but that's worth it to me.
Yeah.
Like. Of going through this whole process of just seeing if I can actually do that.
So monetary value to these sort of things, creative endeavours or experiments, as you put it, which is probably actually a better word than creativity. Experiments. Monetary attribution to an experiment normally equals limitation, essentially,
yeah.
Or direction, some sort of agenda, monetary agenda. And I think ultimately the biggest freedom and of experimentation have normally come from people who were just in a position where they were just obsessed with exploring anything.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to It's interesting, actually. You think of a modern day version of this, like Elon Musk, for example. I remember looking at
I
some.
love that guy.
But I remember the last thing I heard, like yesterday, I think, is like he was trying to launch some truck. Transportation.
Have you been following this? So
I haven't,
like,
but I just saw a glimpse of it.
It looks like a child's drawing, but the actual genius in that is that people are slamming it, and they've sold something like 200,000 units already in pre-orders.
Is this the truck that had indestructible glass and then?
But didn't he throw a ball at it or
and
something?
It broke or something.
But here's the thing. No, but here's the. I think like I saw this post about it saying, someone pointing out that they've done absolutely zero marketing on this and still sold like 200,000 units. Because the weird design of this, some part of him knew that we'd get talking about this, the internet would have a field day with it. And before we know it, they're selling out of them.
I had a weird sort of roundabout conversation yesterday with my brother and my mum about how... So we're going to a wedding soon, and my mum, for some reason, at the moment she's quite busy. She didn't have any time to go out shopping between now and the time of the wedding. So she'd been ordering these shoes off of Amazon, right? So she'd ordered multiple pairs of shoes so she could try them on and return them. And I think she ordered 8 pairs of shoes. And she kept one and she returned the others. And they were all like free.
To try them on?
Yeah. And I remember thinking, like, how is this a thing? Like,
it's not a thing. I've never heard of it.
No, but how
that's
does
called
this...
going to a fitting room in a shop.
Yeah, but how does this company exist where it can essentially bring the shop...
Wait, sorry, I misheard you. So that's the point of the company. They send you
so Amazon,
that many...
Oh, so no, Amazon. Okay, so you different companies, different shops.
Right.
But Amazon, essentially through different makes, I mean. You order it through Amazon. They order them, deliver them to you. But you can return them for free.
So the intention is not to send them back, but it is just an option. Oh, okay.
But I was thinking, like, if this was to get out of control, like, because there's already this thing. It's like there's these drop-off points, so you get petrol garages and post office.
But also you heard the Amazon scams, or people, it didn't arrive. My telly didn't arrive. The telly I spent 500 quid on didn't arrive, and it did.
But there's no way of them proving the arrival of it. Well, this is the reason I'm bringing this up in link with Elon Musk is this. I think that once a company becomes so successful that money just goes out the window. Like, I think the founder of Amazon is like 100 and something, 17 billion.
But it's the thing, like Elon Musk, he's got money already. I think that guy just wants to get to Mars. That's what he's concerned about.
So this is the thing: that when you put a demonstration of a product on, like this truck and the demonstration of the glass, there's actually a certain charm about it when it doesn't go wrong. If he turned around with a real stressed face, there wouldn't be. But if he turned around with like a smile, like a kind of innocent smile on his face, like, yeah, this is what happens when you experiment. Then it would be.
That's
fine.
Essentially what he's done.
And I think that's great. I think that's great because then, if there was some person that he had to bow down to, who was like, "How dare you? I've just lost," because the headline was, Elon Musk's stakes go down 170 million in a day or something.
But sales didn't. Sales for that went up.
So that's just it's just hilarious. The attribute. What's the word? The attribution of. Wealth or money to a realm that doesn't function in that way at all. Because if you think about it, the physical realm has to support the body, right? So the physical realm has the supporting of the body, and that takes food, things like that. And the way that we've bartered is that has now transpired into money. But thinking doesn't cost money. But there's still an intellectual property thing that goes on that isn't really justified, I don't think. So when a person's purely experimenting, thought experiments, there shouldn't really be a monetary attribution to that.
I kind of see what you mean.
I'm not sure I do, actually. Now that I've said it, it sounds kind of ridiculous.
No, I kind of get what you mean. I just don't know if I'd entirely agree with it, because it's like, it depends. If you literally just come up with an idea, you just said it, I don't know, you said it at a pub or something like that, there's not really a lot you can do about you know. And
Yeah.
to be fair, you can't really claim that that's some great contribution to whatever, or something you came up with on, you know, in the pub, just haphazardly came up with. Like, you can't have a go and people steal that. But yeah, would you say the artist's life is a lonely one?
Thinking about this recently, right? I would say that the call of the artist is rather than people disagree with me on this, I'm just going to say this because this isn't. I know in myself that this isn't quite true, but the closest I can get to it is this: the call of the artist is almost a call to death, but it's not the death of. It's not a full death. It's a death of things, particularly things that exist within our culture, expectations of the self, of the individual. So there's a certain sacrifice if you truly want to hear the depths of that calling. So if you follow that calling a bit, you're kind of blasé about it, and you listen to this, that, and the other, and you explore certain ideas. You delve into it a bit, but you're still kind of meeting your friends at the weekend, and you're still maybe holding down a job. Then there's the next bit, which is like almost obsessional. You go below a certain veil, and certain things start to connect, certain connections that borderline on what people describe as superstitions or extrasensory things, such as synchronicities and coincidences and dreams. You then enter into a realm of understanding that if you carry on any further, you're jeopardizing being a normal human being, functioning as a normal human being. And I think that's where a lot of sort of brilliant artists and musicians and writers and things have gone. Some of them have been brought back from the brink, maybe by a publisher or an agent or a patron or whatever.
Or just a friend.
Or a friend, yeah. Or by themselves, that they allowed the process to run its course and came out the other end. But yes, I would say if you truly want to answer the call within yourself, you're going to at least travel across a lonely abyss at one point. So there was a point, I would say, between the age of 22, 23 when I finished university, and a bit after that, where I didn't see anyone. Maybe I saw a few close friends, like once every couple of months. People didn't see me. I just literally was just going for walks by myself. I was doing my own thing. I was obsessed with my own ideas, doing weird experiments, and as I think you have done at certain points to different degrees.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think there's a re-entry after that isolation. You're never quite going to be a normal person again. Like if you but I don't think you ever truly want to be either. I think it's almost like a complete reversal of scenarios then. You see becoming a normal person again as death. You see that call as the call to death again. So it's almost like the call to death from the first scenario is to enter into the artistic realm, or the creative realm, or the abstract realm, or whatever it is, spiritual realm, whatever you want to call it. I can't label it. But once you're in it, the call to the normal realm, wife, career, property, housing, cars, all of that scenario, to really engage in that also feels like a call to death from that other place. So you kind of float between the middle, and I suppose where I'm at now is maybe exactly on the pinnacle of the seesaw.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I feel like I'm at now.
I kind of feel Well, I kind of think of it like, the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, where he has to go into the labyrinth to defeat the Minotaur. And I see that sometimes as kind of ambition, especially when you're wrestling with like a new concept, something that it's like when you find a new concept, you get obsessed with it, you want to find out everything there is. And it's kind of like going into a labyrinth, because in that journey you get cut off from a lot of other stuff. But what Theseus does in the story, he uses a piece of string to find his way back out of the labyrinth. And I think that's something that people take for granted, when I think it's absolutely fine to get fully immersed in new concepts and all of that, because that's what I love to do. I mean, for God's sake, I tried to build a wind turbine. Like, just because it interests me. Not for any kind of... Like, that's like 40 quid worth of materials.
Yeah.
It's something I haven't even finished. But I think it's about leaving yourself links back to the world. Sometimes that's through friends or family. But it's kind of like, it's like having a line of string or a trail of breadcrumbs to lead you back to who you actually are.
That is actually very interesting, because like there is a spiritual order that uses the labyrinth as its logo. I can't quite remember what it was. Is it like a Celtic thing to do with the Celtic cross and the link between the Celtic cross and the labyrinth? But the I think what probably happens here is that when we hear about the people from years gone past who had similar experiences, they had an urge to isolate themselves. In those days, the population was so low that it was much easier for them to achieve that isolation. Mm. And I think it's particularly in cities now and large towns, that isolation becomes half-hearted, as in you have a person experiencing that level of isolation, but they're in a 6-bedroom shared house with 5 other people who are going off to work every day, and they're in that room. And it's this bizarre mixture of like this internal journey is happening in busy, built-up areas, and I don't think it's managing to complete itself, the transition, like the butterfly caterpillar scenario. I don't. It's almost like the habitat for that transformation is not sustaining that metamorphosis. It's not allowing it to fully happen. So I think what you're getting is a spin-off of loads of people who are borderline entering that space, but they're not quite, and so they're just stuck. They're stuck in this kind of like, I know this is all bullshit, and I know that I don't want to be doing this for Christmas this year, just doing the same shit again. I know I don't want to just be doing this just endless stuff.
Yeah.
They've almost got a bit of a disdain for mankind, because they haven't quite gone through the whole process.
Yeah.
And I think maybe there is something to be said for the simple wisdom in our culture, going back through all the sort of religious texts, of actual isolation. Because it might just take a month. It might just take a month or two of actual isolation to achieve what it takes for 5 years of a person hiding away in a room built up in a really built up place.
Yeah. Do you think the art world now, though, like modern art, the institutions we find ourselves in, do you think they do much to accommodate that kind of process?
No. The modern art has essentially become obsessed with, in some ways, the exact antidote to that process. So one way out of that process, which is a bit of a red herring or a fool, I don't know. Yeah, a red herring maybe is a good way of putting it, or Trojan horse maybe, is that one way of getting out of that process is to not master the art that's being presented to you, but to face the challenge and make stage one the most important thing, which is the thinking about it stage, the conceptualization of it. And so in my mind, and I know a lot of people will disagree with this, that's absolutely fine, like, but this is kind of how I view things. In my mind, to be at stage one and become obsessed with the conceptualization of an idea, but not able to embody it enough to materialize that idea, means that it's symbolic of our society.
Yeah.
In that we are so disembodied.
We just get bored quickly.
Yeah, we can't materialise.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there for me, because that's exactly how I feel. It's like a lot of modern art now, and we both work very closely, with art.
Within the art world, yeah.
And it's like they've stopped at the idea. It all just looks like ideas now. Oh, someone's come up with an idea, but how have you fleshed that out? It doesn't seem as developed. And it's like we get bored easily. Like we just want to, you say, oh, that's an interesting idea, that's an interesting concept. It's like they've stopped at that. And then all the substance after that is just gone. Part of that, I think, is you have a very unique kind of market, a very unique kind of economy in the art world. Because, yes, look, to us, the money thing doesn't really matter. But this is a massive business. And it's a very unique business in the sense that it's near impossible to regulate. Because of how things are valued. So, and we also see this kind of almost hyperinflation in the art market. A painting can sell for $1 million one week, and then the next week like 20 million. Like in no other kind of market can you find stuff like that. And I think because of this kind of inflation, there's this there's the demand, but there's not necessarily the supply. So I think what you get is just people, they're just throwing everything they can at it. And you get this kind of saturation of the art market to the point that, to me, a lot of it's the same in the regard of just, it just stops at the idea. It stops at the concept. It falls short of something for me to actually give me that experience, to give me that feeling. And there's just so much of it because they're trying to desperately keep up with that demand.
And that is actually what the whole of our commercial world has become about. So if you go into a shop now, it is almost impossible to get a well-made, simple t-shirt or simple jumper.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't exist. Even if you think, okay, you use this logic, you think, okay, so I bought these kind of £20-30 t-shirts and jumpers, and they last for a year and then they're gone. Let me go to the other end. Let me go to one of these expensive shops, buy something for £150, buy a jumper for £150. They've got a little logo on them. Some of those are even made shoddily. They're not even. It's like the real thing doesn't exist anymore. Like, I remember the chalks that Michelangelo and Raphael drew with were a surface layer that was abundant at the time, and it doesn't exist anymore. It was exhausted during the Renaissance period. Mm-hmm. And now we have these Conte crayons, these Conte things that are all like simulation chalks of that time. And sometimes I go through antique shops and I find old things, like a wooden wheel that was made 200 years ago for a cart or something. And the quality of it's amazing. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like, it's almost like once we lost the ability to concentrate, we stopped valuing things that were created in that period or in that frame of mind.
Yeah, because it's kind of like that job interview logic. And they say, like, within 10 seconds or 20 seconds, someone's made up their opinion about you.
Yeah.
They've made up their mind. And it seems to be on that, like, we hook people in. And I've seen art get quite vulgar. I mean, obviously, there's always been, like, vulgar art, erotic art, and that kind of thing. But it's like all of it now. It's just like a lot of the stuff I see in public, it feels the need to, some of it to have some kind of shock value or something to immediately draw you in. Because that's what it's about. I think it's really sad in a way because we've moved away from the slow burn to the instant gratification, the instant hit, and that it says so much about our society. I was doing the podcast last week with Victoria, and we were talking about this kind of this society of instant gratification, instant films, on Netflix or TV shows. You can binge. You don't even have to wait week by week. You get everything on demand. Art in the same regard as well. I could just Google a picture right now of an artwork. I don't need to go to a gallery.
Yeah,
So what does that say about the gallery experience? About how essential that is in a time when we can just Google stuff.
And also the thing you said before about when you watched Jaws and it triggered this thing in you, and that thing needed time to mature and grow. Nowadays, if a young person was touched by something in that same way, I wonder whether they would just retweet it and repost it, and that would be the whole process of what we've just discussed for half an hour that took up 10 or 15 years of our life. I wonder if just retweeting is their way of just going, right, done with that. That was my realisation. I've passed on that baton. The Olympic torch. Maybe tweeting is like just constant passing on of this Olympic torch.
Yeah, maybe. But with the difference being that the flame goes out within a week. Let's say a meme, within a week, that's probably got a shelf life of a week. Within a week, people probably are sick of it or stop talking about it.
Well, it becomes overconsumption.
Exactly.
I think that's
the problem. Yeah. Because we are, like I said, a society of instant gratification. We're also a society of overconsumption. We overwatch films. We over binge TV. Even that term, binging, is completely new in the sense of our generation. Because it's like, we've never had the issue of consumption that we had now. And it's become so much more complicated as well. It's not just things like overeating. Now it's over everything. Overthinking in some regards as well.
Massive. Overthinking's become a massive thing.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given? Or could give someone else?
Well, people pleasing was the most recent thing, which I think I mentioned to you the other day. And I think if you are, let's say, quite aware of other people and other people's comforts and what makes people, feel relaxed and things like that, you can become somebody who spends a lot of your own energy on pleasing others. And I think pleasing others is, although complete lack of it leads to potentially a horrible world, I think too much of it can actually destroy your own freedom. So I think that's something that I heard recently, that in 30 years of life or whatever, somehow it skipped my attention. And I think that when you are aware of other people's needs, other people's sufferings, other people's excitements, other people's ambitions, it's good. You don't want to be not aware of that stuff. But you also have to realise that it's theirs. It's not yours. So don't ever take that on board, because people will try to push their stuff onto you. I think we all do it. We all do it. And I think it may actually even be the origin of the vampire myth. The mythology of vampirism is actually that interaction. So I think the best piece of advice, I suppose, is to pursue what you want to pursue for your own reasons without people pleasing. Because although it might sound like quite a simple concept, I think there's not many artists out there who, when you really get to the crux of it, are not actually trying to please an audience or please something, as opposed to actually expressing something real. And the people-pleasing artwork and music and films, it pleases them. It pleases the audience. But it's not memorable. It's not the ones that stand out. And I think those are the unique pieces that come out when a person is truly true to themselves. And that doesn't happen very often. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Wow. That's probably as good a place as any to wrap up the show. I'd like to thank you very much for coming in. This is probably the longest and most enjoyable podcast I've done so far. So thank you so much for coming in.
You're very welcome, Callum. It's been a pleasure.
To everyone listening, thanks so much for listening. I hope you've gained something from this podcast like I have. We'll be back next week. Until then, take care of yourselves.